Welcome to the Chronicles of Rome, Episode 8, The Sack of Rome, Woe to the Vanquished. Before the grandeur of empire, before Rome's legions marched across continents, there was a time when the city stood vulnerable, its future uncertain. In the early days of the Republic, Rome faced a calamity that would sear itself into the collective memory of its people, the sack of the city by the Gauls in 390 BCE. Though traditionally dated to 390 BCE, some modern scholars place it closer to 387. This episode delves into that harrowing event, exploring its causes, the devastation it wrought, and the profound transformations it spurred within the Roman state. In the late 5th century BCE, the Italian peninsula was a mosaic of cultures and tribes. To the north, beyond the Apennine Mountains, lay the lands of the Gauls, a collection of Celtic tribes known for their fierce warriors and migratory movements. Among them were the Senones, led by a chieftain named Brennus. The Senones were not isolated raiders. They were part of a larger wave of Celtic migration sweeping across Europe. Pressured by population growth and tribal rivalries in Central Europe, Gallic groups began pushing into northern Italy in the 5th and 4th centuries BCE. The Senones had recently crossed the Alps and seized fertile lands along the Adriatic coast. Their chieftain, Brennus, was a seasoned war leader, and like many Celtic nobles, sought both land and honor through warfare. Celtic warfare itself shocked the Roman psyche. Gallic warriors charged into battle with loud war cries, wild hair, painted bodies, and flamboyant armor. Their speed and ferocity overwhelmed the slower, more rigid Roman formations, especially at the Battle of the Allia, where panic spread as quickly as the enemy's advance. In 391 BCE, the Senones descended into Etruria and laid siege to the city of Clusium. The desperate Etruscans, unable to face the threat alone, appealed to Rome for assistance. Rome, viewing itself as an emerging power and protector of central Italy, answered the call. The Senate dispatched envoys from the patrician Fabian family to negotiate with the invaders. However, diplomacy unraveled. The Roman envoys, instead of merely observing or mediating, joined the Etruscans in battle. This breach of protocol outraged Brennus. The Gauls, who had come to Clusium seeking land and opportunity, now turned their wrath southward. Rome had violated custom and would pay the price. In July of 390 BCE, the Senones marched toward Rome, traveling swiftly down the Tiber River valley. At a place where the Allia River met the Tiber, just 11 miles from the city, the Romans hastily assembled a force to intercept them. The Roman army, largely made up of inexperienced recruits and poorly coordinated units, stood little chance against the hardened Gallic warriors. The battle was short and catastrophic. The Roman lines broke, panic spread. Soldiers fled in all directions, some seeking refuge in nearby hills, others rushing back toward the city. This defeat at the Allia was more than a military loss. It was a psychological collapse. Rome was left exposed, defenseless, and gripped by fear. 3 days later, the Gauls arrived at Rome's gates. What they found astonished them. The city was largely empty. Most civilians had fled into the countryside. The priests had carried sacred objects into hiding. A determined group of senators, soldiers, and patricians fortified themselves on the Capitoline Hill, prepared to resist to the last. The rest of the city lay still. Its temples, homes, and markets were eerily quiet. The Gauls entered without resistance. What followed was a scene of horror. Temples were looted, houses were set ablaze, statues of gods were defiled. The elderly who remained were slaughtered where they sat. Livy tells us that some of the city's elders, too proud to flee, dressed in their ceremonial robes and sat in silence as the invaders passed through. They were mistaken for statues, until one moved and was struck down. The defenders on the Capitoline held out. Night after night, they watched the city below burn. Supplies grew scarce. Hunger and disease crept in, but still they resisted. The Gauls attempted direct assaults on the hill, but failed to break the defenses. They tried scaling the cliffs, only to be repelled. In one famous tale, a group of Gauls attempted a silent night attack up a little-known path. The Roman sentries missed the movement, but the sacred geese of Juno squawked and flapped, waking Marcus Manlius, a consul of old. He rushed to the edge, raised the alarm, and helped drive the Gauls back down the slope. These geese were part of a sacred flock kept in the temple of Juno, Moneta. Their role in saving the city elevated Juno's standing among Roman deities, and she would henceforth be honored as a protector of the city. The very name Moneta would come to be associated with Rome's temple mint in later centuries. The story of the capital's survival became sacred, proof that even when the city fell, its spirit endured on high. But the siege wore on, and the city could not hold out forever. A truce was negotiated. Brennus demanded a ransom, 1,000 pounds of gold in exchange for sparing the survivors and ending the occupation. The gold was gathered. The Romans came to the agreed place, brought their scales, and began to weigh the payment. But Brennus accused the Romans of cheating. He ordered a heavier set of weights to be used. When the Romans protested, he removed his sword and threw it onto the scale. Victis, he said. Woe to the vanquished. The weight of those words would be felt for generations. Rome was left smoldering, its monuments in ruins, its pride shattered. The Gauls eventually departed, their sacks full of gold. Whether they were driven out by Roman counterattack or left of their own accord remains unclear. Some ancient sources, like Diodorus Siculus, claim that the Gauls were struck by disease and famine during the siege, forcing their withdrawal. It is possible that plague, not warfare, drove the invaders from the city. Roman sources often embellish the story with tales of divine intervention or Camillus returning in glory. Later Roman writers claimed that Marcus Furius Camillus, called back from exile, arrived just in time to rally a new force and drive the Gauls out, though even they admit it may be legend more than fact. Modern historians have questioned the historicity of this dramatic rescue. The lack of contemporary records and the patriotic tone of later Roman writers suggest that Camillus's triumph may have been more political mythology than documented fact. Camillus, once exiled over accusations of corruption following the fall of Veii, was recalled in Rome's hour of need. His return, whether historical or not, became a powerful symbol of Roman resilience and redemption. One enduring story tells how, in the wake of the sack, Rome nearly gave up entirely. A serious debate erupted in the Senate over whether to abandon the city and relocate to Veii, which had only recently been conquered. It was Camillus who reportedly halted the exodus, appealing to Roman identity and sacred duty. For this, he was hailed as the second founder of Rome. But what mattered was not how the Gauls left. It was what they left behind. The sack of 390 BCE was the darkest hour the Republic had yet faced. It was a wound that never fully healed. Roman children would grow up hearing the story. Elders would speak of the flames, of the silence before the slaughter, of the bitter phrase that echoed in the alleys long after the enemy had gone. For centuries afterward, Rome would treat any Gallic threat with disproportionate fear, building temples to appease the gods and launching campaigns to ensure such a terror could never return. The trauma also shaped Rome's long obsession with Cisalpine Gaul, fueling wars against tribes like the Boii and Insubres, and ultimately culminating in Julius Caesar's Gallic Wars nearly 4 centuries later. The religious aftermath of the sack was no less significant. Rome's priestly colleges, particularly the pontifices led by the Pontifex Maximus, began to more rigorously systematize rituals and omens, their goal to ensure that the gods would never again allow such a catastrophe. Auspices were taken more seriously, rituals were codified, and the practice of appeasing divine wrath became an essential part of Roman statecraft. Rome institutionalized its memory of the sack. The anniversary of the Battle of the Allia, July 18th, was marked on the Roman calendar as a dies nefastus, a day of ill omen when no public business could be conducted. It served as an annual reminder of Rome's greatest humiliation and a warning never to let it happen again. Rome responded with fierce determination. The city was rebuilt quickly, almost chaotically. Streets were crooked, houses went up without a plan. In contrast to the structured colonial cities Rome would later found, with their grid-based Cardo and Decumanus, this rebuilding effort bore the marks of urgency and desperation. But the walls, those were not neglected. Though the Servian Wall had older foundations, it was after the sack that its expansion became a citywide priority. The Servian Wall, a massive circuit of stone and earth, was reconstructed around the city. Its message was clear: never again. Military reforms soon followed. Rome began to abandon the rigid Greek-style phalanx formation and embraced a more flexible structure. The maniple system was born, which divided legions into smaller, more adaptable units. It allowed for greater mobility, initiative, and strategic coordination. It was a system born out of necessity, and it would come to define Rome's battlefield dominance for centuries. Rome also became more aggressive. The trauma of the sack ignited a new mindset: security through strength, survival through expansion. Over the next decades, Rome would begin to absorb its Latin neighbors, subdue the Etruscans, and drive back the very peoples who had once overrun its walls. The phrase Victis did not fade from memory. It became a warning, a reminder of what happens to those who are weak, who are divided, who are unprepared. The Gauls had come once, and they had broken the city. Rome vowed it would never happen again. The sack of Rome in 390 BCE was not the end. It was a beginning. It was the crucible from which a harder, more disciplined republic emerged, one that understood the price of survival, one that would, in time, build an empire from the very fear that once consumed it. But remember this: before Rome stood atop the ruins of Carthage and Corinth, before its generals wrote history in the dust of foreign lands, there was a time when the city itself lay in ashes, a time when strangers roamed its streets, when temples fell and elders died sitting upright in silence, when a sword landed on a scale and a foreign voice said, "Woe to the vanquished." Rome heard that voice, and it never forgot. This has been the Chronicles of Rome. Join us next time as we explore the Roman response to vulnerability, the evolution of the manipular legion, a more flexible system born from the lessons of the sack, and meet Cincinnatus, the farmer turned dictator who became the living model of Roman virtue and civic duty.